Everybody wants a 6.5 Creedmoor. It's the best elk cartridge ever at 1,000 yards, blah, 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 which is total BS.
Wait, 223 Remington on elk? Who's stupid enough to try that?
There's no such thing as being overgunned.
Foot-pounds of energy, it has no functional relevancy or use whatsoever.
One shot from that 243 at almost 700 yards dropped it on the spot.
This is causing hunters to miss shots on elk. I've read through the data, I've done the research on big and small elk cartridges, and one of these is the clear winner. If you are new to Elk Nerd, I just started hunting a few years ago, so I am learning from an unbiased and clean slate. Taking this analytical approach has led me to success on general season tags. So how does this tie in to the great cartridge debate? On one end of the spectrum of this cartridge debate, you have the tested and traditional thought that power is priority. And that's because elk are big animals and therefore need big cartridges like the 300 Win Mag to bring them down. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have a newer community of hunters that believe that shot placement is king, and to the extreme, that smaller, easier to shoot cartridges like the 6.5 Creedmoor or even the 223 Remington can and should be used to hunt elk. Okay, here's how we're going to tackle this. I have hard data from these studies right here that have tested big versus small cartridges. I'm going to summarize the data for the following categories. We'll first talk about magnums and if they're actually more effective at killing elk. We'll then talk about how an elk actually dies when you shoot him. We'll then talk about smaller cartridges and if they're actually more accurate than bigger ones. We'll then tie all of that data together and a little bit of my opinion too on what I think the best elk cartridge is. I also want to give a big shout out and thanks to John McAdams of the Big Game Hunting Blog YouTube channel. He does a lot of gel testing, including many of the videos that I'm going to use in this video. So feel free to check out his full cartridge reviews up here. 300 Win Mag, 7 PRC, and 6.5 PRC. These all have something in common. And that's that they're all magnums. And that they're of the most popular elk hunting rounds. Elk are just big creatures, and bigger cartridges just do more damage. I don't think anyone is going to argue with that. Shot for shot, apples for apples, magnums do more damage. And that's because of 4 things that magnums generally offer. Bigger calibers, just meaning wider bullets, heavier bullets, faster velocities, and just more energy. Let's talk about the tested data for each of these individually. Hey guys, before we dive into the data, I want to show you some new gear that I got my hands on. I'm super proud to partner with Maven Optics. They sent me this scope that I'm running for black bear this spring and elk in the fall. Now, Maven makes top tier Japanese glass, but what I care about even more than that is their reliability. I hunt in steep, thick country, and my rifle takes hits and dings on the regular, and I need confidence that my scope is still holding zero. The RS 1.2 that I'm running here provides me that assurance of reliability. Now you combine the Japanese glass and the illuminated reticle on top of that, this scope is a home run. If you're looking for high quality, bomb-proof glass, scopes, and binos, use the link in the description below. It's my affiliate link and helps me support doing more research and making more videos just like this. Alright, let's start with caliber. In this study right here, 1,000 elk were shot with copper ammo of varying calibers. Now they shot elk with as small as 25 caliber all the way up to 338 caliber. So, were bigger calibers more effective after 1,000 elk? They found, drumroll please, no significant difference between the calibers. And before all of you start reporting me to Joseph von Benedict, let me clarify exactly what the study and most of the studies like this actually test for. They're not testing for what percentage of animals got recovered, unfortunately. What they are testing for is how far the animals run after they got shot, which they call flight distance. I know that's a weird name to call how far an animal's run, but it's essentially used as a proxy for how lethal a certain shot is. If an elk dies quicker, that shot is more lethal. Now, it's also important for me to point out that most of these studies don't track missed shots. So we're missing data on missed elk and likely a lot of wounded elk that hunters just assumed that they missed. Now guys, I try to be as honest and factual as I can, but I do make mistakes and sometimes my biases do get in the way. So please read through these studies in the description below and make a comment if I make any mistakes, and I will pin any corrections you guys find at the top of the comment section below. Now, saying that caliber doesn't matter is a very bold statement, so let me give you my thoughts on why the data from this study is showing that. Take a look at this wound channel of this cow elk that I shot a few months ago. At the largest point, somewhere around the middle of the chest, this wound cavity is conservatively around 5 inches in diameter. And that's after the lungs collapsed and shrunk. So the real wound cavity when I actually shot the elk was likely a lot bigger, possibly 7 to 10 inches in diameter. Now, the bullet that I used on that elk only had a diameter of about 1/4 of an inch. Now, if I had stepped up and used a bigger caliber that's closer to maybe 1/3 of an inch, like a .308 caliber or maybe even a .338 caliber bullet, would that have made the wound cavity 12 inches in diameter instead of 10? Maybe, probably. Is the elk going to notice the difference? Probably not. And for those interested, I will tell you what cartridge I use to hunt elk at the end of the video, but I guess my point is that when a bullet hits real tissue at rifle velocities, whether you're using a copper or a lead bullet, the wound channel that that bullet creates is generally going to overshadow the caliber of that bullet, making bullet caliber on its own kind of pointless. But let's talk bullet weight because that actually did make a difference. This same study also tested for bullet weights, as low as 115 grain all the way up to 225 grain bullets. Surely, a 225 grain bullet should kill a lot quicker than a 115 grain bullet, after 1,000 elk, right? Well, they found that it actually did make a difference. The animals did die quicker, and they were fairly confident in that finding with a p-value of 0.04. Now, a p-value is a statistical measure of confidence, and the lower, the better. Anything below a 0.05 is pretty good. So we can say, at least based off of this study, that bullet weight does matter. Now, unfortunately, for my Magnum friends watching this video, the R value, or the correlation, was pretty damn low at 0.07. Now, with correlation, it's the opposite of the p-value. The higher, the better. A score of 1 being perfect correlation. So, essentially, the confidence is high, but the correlation with effectiveness is weak. To rephrase in my own words, bullet weight confidently means almost nothing. Alright, what about speed? Everyone knows you need velocity to open up and expand the bullet once it hits tissue, especially with copper bullets, which were used in this study. Now, we will jump to a study that used lead in just a minute. So this study did test for impact velocity, and they did find that magnum velocities on their own did shorten flight distance, meaning it was more effective, with another p-value of, again, 0.04. But, there's always a but. But, when the researchers included other factors like shot placement, the importance factor of velocity was pretty low. Not nothing, but fairly low. Now, this should be of no surprise, but the factors with the highest scores of importance were things that were related to accuracy and shot placement. Shocker. Now, I was honestly pretty surprised to read that, at least in this study, velocity did not matter as much as I thought it would have. But when you think about how animals dies, it still kind of makes sense, because you have to hit vitals to kill an elk. And even if your bullet does not expand at all and it just pencils right through because it's going too slow, assuming you hit heart and lungs, you're so likely going to cause plenty of damage, more than enough to recover that animal. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is energy, which is the core element of Magnum cartridges. Mathematically speaking, energy is just velocity squared times weight cut in half, or speed times weight divided by 2. And for bullets and cartridges, energy is typically given in foot-pounds of energy. I'm sure that many of you have heard the gospel in the elk Bible itself says that you need 1,500 foot-pounds of energy on impact to kill an elk. Now, I think we all know that this is just an arbitrary number and more of a guideline, not a hard rule. Now, my question of the video is an oddball question, and that is, would a 9mm handgun point blank to the lungs kill an elk? I know that's a weird one, but it's meant to provoke thought and discussion, so let me know in the comments below. Now, back to energy. That study with 1,000 elk did not test for energy, but I would imagine that it would have made some difference, considering that both velocity and weight made minimal differences. Now, this study in Montana on 160 elk using copper bullets again found that impact energy made no significant difference. And the furthest shot in this study was 810 yards, yet impact energy did not make a difference on the elk. But that's copper bullets, so let's talk about lead bullets. This study right here tested copper and lead bullets on 276 Sambar deer in Australia. Now, if you haven't heard of a Sambar deer before, they are the 3rd biggest deer species in the world, right behind elk, with a max weight of around 1,200 pounds. So very similar in size to elk, and that's why we're using this study for this video. So in this study with Sambar deer, they did test for energy, and they found that energy did not make a difference if the animal was shot and killed with a single chest shot. But overall, if you include all the shots together, it did have a good probability of actually reducing the flight distance. Now, just for reference, the cartridges that were used in this study were as small as a .270 Winchester all the way up to a .338 Lapua, a massive difference in energy. So overall, what does this data say? Well, for all the studies, pretty much across the board, shot placement was easily the biggest factor. But we all know that, and we love to ignore it. So, what do you actually care about? Well, assuming you hit on or close to vitals, here's what the data says. Caliber, doesn't matter. Bullet weight, almost doesn't matter. Speed matters a little bit. And energy also matters a little bit, probably because speed mattered a little bit. Shot placement is the only thing that mattered, obviously, across the board entirely. Now, I know that that's probably gonna piss a lot of people off, but if you understand how elk and deer die when they get shot, this actually does make sense. So let's talk about how a bullet actually kills an elk. When you shoot an elk in the lungs, you are not popping the lungs. This is a big misconception that I personally assumed when I started hunting. The lungs are not hollow balloons. They actually have a similar structure to that, more of like a sponge, relatively light and airy. Now, the lungs and the heart get a lot of blood. Literally 100% of the body's blood must be pumped through the heart and the lungs to oxygenate the rest of the body. So when you hit the heart or lungs, you're actually causing that elk to die through blood loss, or the technical term is exsanguination. But blood loss followed by hypovolemic shock, which is essentially where the heart stops pumping because it's not getting enough blood on its own to keep functioning. Now, tying this back to magnums and causing blood loss, the lungs are pretty fragile organs, and they're actually more air than actual tissue. It does not take a lot to do a lot of damage to them. So it makes sense that a lung shot from a 300 Win Mag and a 6.5 Creedmoor pretty much do the same thing, which is a lot of blood loss and a dead elk. Now let's talk gut shots. Now, gut shots are bad because the guts get very minimal blood flow, only about 1/10 of the blood flow in the intestinal tissue compared to the lungs. This is why elk don't bleed out from gut shots. They actually just die of infection hours to days later. Now, aside from shooting the heart and lungs, you can also kill an elk by shooting the central nervous system, the brain or the high spine. This is what's happening when you see animals drop on the spot immediately after being shot. Now, this has very little to do with the energy that that bullet had, and a lot more to do with where that bullet hit. I'm sure that to a lot of you veterans who've been hunting for 30 plus years, this kind of sounds like common sense. But when I started hunting, no one explained this to me. I had to go and read the research and watch a bunch of videos of elk and deer getting shot. So I'm sure there's a bunch of newer hunters watching this video who now have a clearer understanding of what happens when you actually shoot an elk. Alright, I am talking a lot of on magnums and making them seem pointless, but they're not. For example, magnums provide more confidence if you have to break through a lot of bone or a lot of muscle and tissue on your way into the lungs or the heart. Magnums also offer better external ballistics, meaning lower drop and better wind deflection when you're shooting further shots. After all, the data does say they do a little bit better than smaller cartridges, so why use anything smaller?
And I'll just say this. If I hear another shot placement is king about killing elk, ugh.
Shot placement is king. This is clear in the data and just common sense. If and only if you hit vitals or central nervous system will you recover that elk, with rare exception. Now, the appeal or argument to smaller cartridges is that since they don't recoil as much, you will shoot them more accurately and therefore more reliably hit the vitals. Now, I hear people say that all the time, but does the data actually support that lower recoil actually equals better accuracy? And on top of that, how small of a cartridge is too small for elk? Well, let's first start with the data on recoil and accuracy. This study on trained US Army and Marine soldiers shooting shotguns tested accuracy from a standing position. Now, these shotguns either had 25 foot-pounds of recoil or 43 foot-pounds of recoil. This is a lot of recoil. This is roughly the equivalent to going from a 7 PRC to a 338 Lapua. That is a big jump and a lot of recoil. And with that big jump in recoil, the accuracy decreased by 64%. On top of that, the soldiers actually chose to shoot the lower recoiling shotgun significantly more, which implies that hunters will practice more if they have a less recoiling rifle. Now, that practice part is pretty damn important, I would say. So you should ask yourself, if I have a 6.5 PRC or a 7 PRC, Which one am I going to be able to shoot more and practice more with? Before I talk more about accuracy, I want to talk about finding elk. Because the hard truth is, the vast majority of hunters out on the mountain are struggling with just finding elk in the first place. And that's because they go into their hunt without a solid game plan. And this was me when I first started. My first couple years hunting elk, I found 0 elk. Fast forward to this past year, I found elk 8 out of my 9 days that I hunted before I killed my bull. Now, if you hunt hard and are putting in the effort but just aren't finding elk, that is something that I can help with. I offer one-on-one e-scouting and game planning. We will sit down on Zoom, look at your specific unit on Onyx, mark pins and routes, and form a day-by-day game plan to put you on elk in your specific unit. When I'm glassing, there's generally 3 things I'm looking for.
And like, I really appreciate the consulting. This has been super helpful developing these routes. I learned a lot today. So
tell me, how you feeling about your hunt coming up this year?
Quite a bit more confident.
I've definitely learned a lot in this hour. This year is the most confident I've been.
I just opened up scheduling for this month only, May of 2026, and these spots do go super quick, so book now. There's a link in the pinned comment down below, or just go to elknerd.com. If for whatever reason we finish the one-on-one and you think that the session was not worth it, I will 100% refund you, no questions asked. But I feel pretty confident that that's not going to happen, and that this one-on-one will significantly boost your odds, not just this season of punching your tag, but also the seasons in the future too. So sign up now. Moving on to this 2012 literature review found that accuracy in trained soldiers significantly degrades after 10 to 12 foot-pounds of recoil energy. Now, 10 to 12 foot-pounds of recoil is really not a lot. This means that even a 6.5 Creedmoor might be too much, even for trained soldiers. And I'll put this out there. I personally flinch with a 308. Now, I don't shoot a lot, but I certainly do shoot more than the average hunter. Yet still, a 308 is too much for me personally to shoot accurately. Long story short, the data and my personal biases support that more recoil does degrade accuracy, even down to the tiny 6.5 Creedmoor that many people think is too small for elk. But this begs the question, how small is too small? Well, this is where it becomes a little bit subjective and also a little bit anecdotal. Now, the earlier studies tell us that smaller cartridges were very effective, but those studies only went as low as a 308 6.5 Creedmoor range. But what about something even smaller? The Rockslide forum has the infamous 223 thread that has hundreds of pages of people posting their kills on deer, elk, bears, and moose with 223. Yes, moose with a 223. Now, are these hunters selectively posting their successful kills instead of the animals they've wounded with a 223? Yeah, almost certainly that's just how the internet works. But I will tell you, these wound cavities look pretty convincing. If a 223 can make it through both lungs on a moose, I think a 6.5 Creedmoor with double the energy is probably more than enough for an elk. Moving on from Rockslide, here is an anecdote. Frank Glazer, also known as the Alaskan Wolfman, is famous or infamous for using a 220 Swift on Alaskan moose. Now, the 220 Swift is no longer a popular cartridge, but it was very popular back in the day and fired a tiny 40-grain bullet really fast, around 4,000 feet a second. That's why it was so popular back in the day. Frank Glazer, the Alaskan Wolfman, used that to kill countless Alaskan moose. For some more anecdotes, the Outdoor Life YouTube channel filmed killing a moose with a 22 ARC. The Exo Mountain guys killed 2 caribou and 2 moose with a 6 Creedmoor. I think you get the point here. Tiny cartridges are indeed capable of killing really big animals. Guys, I wrote out this video to continue and be about twice as long, just giving a bunch of my opinions on all this stuff. But you guys have all the info here. Most of you guys can come to your own conclusion just fine. But for the newer hunters who are watching this and are just lost and confused in all of the options, all of the numbers, all the data, whatever, here's the answer. Just use whatever you already have, or whatever rifle your dad already has. Don't go and spend a bunch of new money on a new rifle, okay? Spend your money and time learning about elk behavior and practicing with your rifle that you already have. That being said, if you do need to buy a new rifle, or you're just looking for your first rifle to go hunting with, here is what I believe, honestly, is the best elk cartridge, not just based off the evidence, but also based off of practicality. Guys, just get a 6.5 Creedmoor. I know it's boring, I know it's not what you want to hear, but listen, you're going to be way more accurate with it because it's relatively low recoil. It has more than enough killing power for elk. It has high BC bullets for good wind deflection. It's available in pretty much every damn rifle. And most importantly, in my opinion, the ammo is relatively cheap, meaning you get to practice a lot. And that matters way more than the spiel I just gave on big versus small cartridges. Okay, practice is matters more than everything else. At the beginning of this video, I alluded to the fact that this emotional fixation on cartridges causes hunters to miss and wound a lot of elk. And if you watched my last video, you know that only half of the elk that get shot at with rifles actually get recovered. The other half get wounded or just missed. And I honestly believe that that is because we spend more time and money fantasizing about our cartridges than we actually do shooting our cartridges. So look, if you want the quick summary so that you can move on and get to practicing, this whole video was about power versus recoil, essentially. Magnums do kill elk a little bit better. Smaller cartridges do lead to better shot placement. It's all about finding the balance. And from what I've seen, and in myself and others, I believe that that balance point is a lot lower than most hunters want to admit. Now, for those curious what I use, this is the 22 Creedmoor. I use it for elk, deer, and bear. Yeah, it's just a 6.5 Creedmoor shooting a smaller and faster bullet. I personally believe the 22 Creedmoor would be the best elk cartridge in the world because it's the perfect balance of recoil and velocity. But it's not legal in every state, and there's also only a few rifles available in it, so I can't recommend it to everyone. I killed a cow elk with it last year, and I'll kill a bull with it this year. Now, I am thinking of making one more video on how to actually choose the best elk cartridge specific to you and your circumstances. I do think it'd be helpful to a lot of newer hunters that are just caught up in all the BS, so if you'd find that useful, let me know. If you would benefit from one-on-one e-scouting and e-coaching and need help just finding elk in the first place, click the sign-up link below. And don't forget the Maven link is below if you're looking to upgrade your optics. These three things are what actually let me keep making this content, hopefully moving to full-time. So if any of that resonates with you, I'd really appreciate you checking out those links. And last but not least, I am running my own project and my own study for 2026 with 100 elk hunters, so if you want to be a part of that, links are in the description below.
I just shot a massive bull.
I didn't bring extra socks.
22 Creedmoor. Packing out the last trip of my cow elk. Brutus, let's go, buddy. Today was a good day.